Today we're doing an updated version of our Seattle expansion mock draft. Who will they take from the 31 existing teams? You'll get my thoughts coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're doing another updated version of our Seattle mock expansion draft. So we haven't done one of these in a few months. The last time we did this was after the rosters were starting to become set to the end of the offseason. Of course, a lot has changed. We've had a fair bit of player movement. So obviously we've had performances, injuries, circumstances, all kinds of things kind of factor into who would be protected, who would be made available, and who the Seattle Kraken very well could be selecting as the first players for their franchise. So we're going to now hop onto the computer. We're going to use the capfriendly.com expansion tool, go through each roster of each team. I'll show you who is being protected and give you my thoughts around that team selection. Then we'll do a quick review at the end to have a look at the roster, make sure we're cap compliant and meet all the criteria that we're supposed to here. So we'll hop on the computer and get started as we go through the teams alphabetically. All right, so first up here, we have the Anaheim Ducks. Now, of course, keep in mind, I understand some of these rosters are going to change a bit before this expansion draft actually takes place. So I know that some of the players we're looking at here may not necessarily be available when it comes time to. But for the Ducks, you know they're protecting Gibson. You know you're not getting your hands on one of their top D and Fowler, Lindholm, and Manson. But you will have some, experienced D that you could take a look at, like a Shattenkirk or a Larson. But I'm going to go into the forward group and take 25-year-old Danton Heinen. Now, he's an RFA who needs a new deal, coming off a $2.8 million contract, but we know he's a player that the Ducks will likely leave available for this selection, given the fact they've been trying to trade him. And I think with what he's done so far in his career, he very well could prove to be a player that might be worth having a look at here. Now, next up, we have the Arizona Coyotes. Now, they have a few players here with no move clauses that they have to protect. Darcy Kuemper is going to be their goaltender that they're going to have protected here. Ekman Larson with a no move. Jacob Chikrin, on the blue line for sure is going to be protected. They don't have many other D that are available here that really need protecting. We have Chalmerson selected, assuming he likely stays and signs an extension, but that's not a given. Within the forward group here, they're protecting Kessel because they have to. Keller, Schmaltz, Dvorak, Christian Fischer, Connor Garland for sure. So we're going to go ahead and take 29-year-old Tyler Pitlick. I mean, there's not a lot here, to be honest, that I really like, but he has a one-year deal, 29 years old, $1.75 million. He could be a useful player for the Kraken, or at the very least, somebody that they use as trade bait. Now, next up, we have the Boston Bruins. Now, the Bruins are in a situation here. It's going to be a little tricky. Technically, both their goaltenders are UFAs, or pending UFAs. I have Tuukka Rask selected as being protected, just because I don't see them going into the expansion draft by that point in the offseason and not having either of them re-sign. So we're going to go with Rask for right now. But obviously on the blue line, McAvoy, Grzelcyk, and Carlo are your three defensemen being protected. Of course, up front, they got Coyle, Marchand, and Bergeron with no move clauses. Pasternak, DeBrusk, Frederick is definitely going to be protected. So that'll leave some interesting options. And we're going to select 31-year-old Craig Smith. I mean, Andre Kasha is interesting, but he's a player that's been injured way too much. I mean, Wagner, Bjork are certainly interesting options as well. But Craig Smith, for the most part, I know his numbers are down a bit this year, but could certainly be a pretty reliable middle six goal scorer. So that's who we're taking here from the Bruins. Now, of course, next is the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres are another team that, to be honest, there's not a ton here that we really like. But, I mean, on the blue line, Ristolainen, Dahlin, Yokoharu are your ones that are going to be protected for sure. Linus Ullmark could be your goaltender, even though he and Hutton are both, again, pending UFAs. I don't see them using that pick on one of their younger guys that certainly are unproven here, like a Johansson, but it could be Johansson that does get protected. It is possible, but we're going with Ullmark for today because I think they will find a way to keep him around. Of course, in the forward group, you've got Eichel, Skinner, Reinhart, Olofsson, Middlestat, Lazar. We have Taylor Hall selected right now because if he is still there, that means he's re-signed, so they would protect him, but good chance Hall won't be on there, and another player could be protected here. So for right now, we're going to take the defenseman Colin Miller, right shot defenseman, only would have another year left on his deal, 28 years old, he's got a good shot. Can be on the power play if you need him to be. Of course, he was part of the Vegas team when they first came in under expansion, so he's used to this process, and I think he could be a useful defenseman for the Kraken. Now, next up, we have the Calgary Flames. Now, Calgary's an interesting team here, to be honest. They're going to have some good players available, and they're going to end up losing something pretty decent. I mean, Markstrom's definitely going to be their goalie. That's protected. On the blue line, I think they're going to expose Captain Giordano with that $6.75 million cap hit and keep Chris Tanev, who they just signed, Rasmus Anderson, and Noah Hannafin. To me, that's the way they go. But, of course, you get Giordano and Oliver Shillington available, which is an interesting pickup. Possibly. Up front, you get Tkachuk, Goudreau, Monahan. They have to protect Lucic, which is unfortunate. Then you get Lindholm. And then I figure they're also going to protect Mangiapane and Dylan Dubé. So that leaves Sam Bennett out there. That leaves Michael Backlund out there. So some interesting choices with some decent contracts. But I think even though it's a little bit of a pricier pick, if I'm doing the Seattle expansion draft, we're taking some leadership here and grabbing Captain Mark Giordano. He very well could be the first captain of the Kraken franchise as well, if they want to name a captain in year one. And I think he's still decent enough to be that top 6 defenseman in Seattle. And unfortunately, Calgary is going to lose somebody good, and I think it's going to be their captain. Next up, we have the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, the Hurricanes are another team that are bound to lose a decent player here. In goal, we're going to assume that Mrazek's re-signed because I think, obviously, that he's their goalie for at least the immediate future. Obviously, Reimer's done well in his absence this year, but I honestly think that Mrazek will come to terms here. But that's certainly an interesting choice for Carolina because they don't have a lot there that's under contract in the goaltending department. But obviously on the blue line, Slavin, Hamilton, and Pesci, to me, are the 3 that's available. So it leaves Gardner, Brady Shea, Hayden Fleury, even possibly Jake Bean if he gets enough games in here. And of course up front, you got Stahl, Aho, Teravainen, Niederreiter, Trocheck. Probably, obviously, Svechnikov for sure. Likely Warren Fogle. I do wonder if they'll maybe wait and sign Jordan Martinook after, because I think he's a very important player to them as well. So some players may wait and sign after the expansion draft, so they're free agents as well. So for me, if I'm the Kraken here looking at the Carolina Hurricanes blue line, I'm taking a defenseman because there's a lot of good choices there. And we're going to take Hayden Fleury, who's still looking for a bigger role, 24 years old, can play either side, has a good contract for another year. And that, to me, makes the most sense for the Hurricanes. Of course, next is the Blackhawks. They're going to have some interesting picks as well. Obviously, Lankinen, after the way he's emerged this year, will be their goalie they pick up and protect here. Of course, they won't have to protect Seabrook. That's more than likely going to be waived for them, given the fact that he's never going to play again. They likely get an exception there, which means they can protect Duncan Keith, who they have to, as well as 2 others, which are likely would be Zadorov and Murphy. I think DeHaan would likely be exposed in that case. Of course, up front, you got Kane and Taves with no move clauses. You get DeBrincat, obviously probably Dylan Strome, assuming he's still there. There is some talk he could be moved. Carpenter, Walmart. Like, there's not a ton of depth there at forward that, because of the exceptions they have for some other guys. Like, they don't have to protect Kubalik or Suter or Khrushchev or any of those guys. So they're going to be able to protect some a lot deeper into the forward group than some places would. So to be honest, this pick is going to be a little bit challenging given the fact that there's just not really a whole lot here to pick from. So we'll select young forward Matthew Highmore, who could certainly benefit from getting more of an opportunity and maybe evolve into being an even better player in Seattle. Now, next up, we have the Colorado Avalanche, who are, again, another team here with a lot of good players, and they're a pretty deep team, so there's bound to be some good players here that are going to be available. There's no doubt about it. But the Colorado Avalanche, are likely protecting Philip Grubauer at this point. They have Eric Johnson on the back end with a no move. Samuel Girard, Cale Makar would be your top 2 D-men. There is some rumors out there that Johnson might waive and actually become expendable here. And if he does, that would go a long ways. But of course, you get a pretty deep forward group there as well with McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog, Burakovsky, Kadri, Donskoy. I think they'll leave Saad available because of the contract. But that still leaves some pretty good young defenseman there. So I'm taking Ryan Graves, 25-year-old love shot defenseman, making just over $3 million to me, would be a great choice for Seattle from this Colorado roster. Now, next up, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're an interesting team. Of course, goaltending-wise, they're going to protect Korpisalo. Jones, Werenski are the top 2 defensemen. I figure Gavrikov will be the number 3D protected here. David Savard may not even be around anymore, plus he's a pending UFA. You've got Atkinson, Nyquist, Domi, Laine, Jenner, Bjorkstrand, and Roslovic likely all available here as well. So there's certainly not really a ton of players to pick from when it comes to the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, they do have some interesting choices between your forward group and the blue line. You're likely only getting a young player for sure, like nothing that's going to be overly exciting, but like everybody else, the Jackets have to make enough players here available. But we're going to end up taking Gabriel Carlsson on the blue line. He's been put through waivers this year. Obviously, the Jackets I don't think they really see him as being a player that really fits in. Now, of course, he needs to get some more games played to factor in being available, but I'm hoping that he gets enough games under his belt to be available here, because there's really nothing else here that I really like for the Jackets. Next up, we have the Dallas Stars. Now, the Dallas Stars are another team with a lot of good options here. We're going to take goaltender Anton Khudobin. That's a no-brainer for me. He's got a great contract for a couple more years, 34 years old. Obviously, they have to protect Ben Bishop here because of the no-move clause. That certainly complicates things for Dallas. I mean, if you look at what else is available here, there's a couple of players that you might be interested in as veteran guys. But to me, Khudobin is your guy between the pipes. We've seen what he can do in the playoffs last year. He's certainly proven that he can be relied upon as a number one or a 1A, 1B. And to me, this is a no-brainer pick for the Kraken. Next, we have the Detroit Red Wings. Now, the Red Wings are another team. To be honest, they don't have a lot here to pick from. There's not going to be much in the way of goaltending that's available. A lot of the forwards, really, they have a lot of exemptions here with some younger players. So we're going to take defenseman Christian Djoos. I know he does technically have to play 2 more games to become available, but considering the number of games left in the season, I feel he will meet that. They do need to obviously meet the requirements here for a certain number of players to be exposed as well. So obviously that would be helpful to them. So to me, Djoos is a depth defenseman. We may not even keep him. He could become trade bait for the Kraken as well. Next up, we have the Edmonton Oilers. Now, the Oilers are another team that's going to have some options here. I mean, you might wonder if they're going to protect a guy like Oscar Klefbom, who's been out for the entire season. They're going to have some goaltenders, like a guy like Alex Stalock, for example, could be available. But at the end of the day, we're going to turn to the forward group, and we're going to take Kyle Turris. Kyle Turris is likely going to be left exposed if he's still an Edmonton Oiler at this point in time. He hasn't really fit there after not really doing well in Nashville. His career's on a bit of a downhill spiral, but I think Turris is still a good player, and if given the right opportunity with the right line mates, I think he can still contribute. I mean, it's not that long ago, he was really tearing it up in Ottawa, and even if he's playing a lower level role, I think it could be a really low risk situation for the Kraken. He's only making $1.65 million. It would only be guaranteed to be there for 1 season. So I'm taking a chance and rolling the dice on a veteran like Turris. The Florida Panthers are next here. Obviously, they're going to have a very interesting conundrum here in the goaltending department. I know that they'd really like to keep Chris Driedger, but the thing is, he's a pending UFA. So if they wait too long to sign him, then obviously he could leave via free agency. If they do sign him, they can't protect him because of Bobrovsky's contract. So certainly a situation where he could be expendable, even though he would probably not want to be. He's been basically playing as much or more here and kind of taking the starter's job. He's a big part of the reason why they're having so much success this year. But as much as I'd like to be able to select him here, at this point, I don't think that's going to be an option. So we're going to go ahead and take Brett Connolly from the forward group. Connolly, to me, is a player that hasn't really fit the best in Florida. He was on waivers earlier. If he can refine his scoring touch, and he'd have 2 years left on his contract at $3.5 million, be a player that the Kraken can either use as a middle six forward or consider trading. Next, we have the Los Angeles Kings, and we're taking goaltender Jonathan Quick. There's no doubt about that one. There's not going to be a ton of players left available. A guy like Jeff Carter might be available, but given his contract, I'm just not sure. I'd rather take my chances on a guy like Quick, who can certainly still play, I think, between the pipes. I have a lot of other options at forward that I can put that money towards. So to me, with the goaltenders available, I'm taking Quick here. He would work well along with Khudobin. It's a great 1A, 1B situation for the inaugural season here for the Kraken. Next, we have the Minnesota Wild. Now, of course, the Wild are another team in a bit of a conundrum here. Again, as long as the rosters are the same as they are today, it's a no-brainer. We're taking defenseman Matt Dumba. Yes, he makes $6 million, and he still has a few years left on that deal. But still, with what I'm looking for this expansion team, he fits perfectly. Now, I would be surprised if he actually ends up being available when we get there, given the fact that I expect him to be traded before this process kicks in. But Dumba right now would be the clear-cut selection off the Wild roster for the Kraken. Next, we have the Montreal Canadiens, another interesting team here to watch. I think we could see a few options available. You do have Jake Allen between the pipes, but, we already selected Quick and Hudobin. As much as Jake would be a great goalie option, I think we're going to have to take young defenseman Victor Mete. Obviously, having guys like Petrie and Weber on the team certainly clog things up in the defense core, especially their number 3 defenseman could either be Sherratt or Edmondson. So one of those guys will be available, and then the other guys that come after them, including Kulak and Mete. Some of their forwards, it's hard to say who's going to be available because of the pending unrestricted free agents they hold right now. But personally, Mete to me makes a lot of sense. He could get a bigger role on a new team and see how much he can flourish here as a full-time NHL player. Next, we have the Nashville Predators, and from the Predators roster here, clearly Saros is going to be the goalie protected. Up front, there's certainly a couple guys that you have no choice to. Obviously contracts like Johansson and Duchesne, as much as they wouldn't mind moving on from, they wouldn't be available for this. They would be traded if there was going to be a move. So we're going to take defenseman Mark Borieski. He'd only have one more year left on his deal at $2 million. Left shot defenseman, 31 years old, can provide that leadership and that grit in the physical play from the back end, and I really like him as being a bottom pair guy for the expansion team. Next up, we have the New Jersey Devils, and again, this is another team, to be honest, with all their young players that are exempt from this, that there's really not much here that I like at all, to be honest. We could take Travis Zajac, but he's going to be an unrestricted free agent, so he's likely not going to be on this list at all. If you look at the other forwards, there's really not much there that's really available. Obviously a guy like Sami Vatanen's interesting, but he's an unrestricted free agent. You're not taking $9 million of PK Subban on. So we're going to take young 23-year-old goaltender Evan Cormier. He's an RFA in 2021, so he'll need a new deal. But he can be signed for cheap. End up being a number 3, number 4 goaltender with the expansion team, because we're going to need a few goalies for the minor leagues anyway. So to me, that's the best option given the lack of options here for the Devils. Now we have the New York Islanders is up next here. Now, of course, we're not taking like an Andrew Ladd. There are some interesting players here, but like Matt Martin, Leo Komarov do not interest me at all. Clutterbuck does to some degree. That's a possibility. But I think we're going to take the steady contract here of Scott Mayfield. He's under term for a few more years. $1.45 million, 28 years old, right shot D. Nothing flashy about Mayfield, but he could certainly be a serviceable number 5, number 6 D possibly on his team, or he can be used as trade bait since he does have a pretty favorable contract. Next up, we have the New York Rangers. Now, the Rangers really are pretty lucky here as well because they have a lot of exemptions due to their young players that they have on this roster, which really allows them to protect quite a bit. So with what we have available, we're not taking Tony DeAngelo. We're steering away from that. Assuming he's still on the Rangers roster, he could be bought out by then. And we're going to take 22-year-old center iceman Brett Howden. Now, he's not a flashy player by any means, but he could certainly be somebody who grabs a more prominent role with the franchise here in Seattle. He's an RFA, needs a new contract, but out of what we have available, to me, that's what I like here for Seattle from the Rangers. Next, we have the Ottawa Senators. They're certainly going to have some interesting picks as well. I think we're going to be able to grab Matt Murray if we wanted to. I think they'll protect Joey Decord after the way the young goaltenders played so far, and Murray's contract's not looking great here so far. Up front, you're going to have some interesting options as well. Same on defense. We're not taking Murray, though. We've already got Quick and Hudobin. That doesn't make sense. So we're going to take Chris Tierney, to me, who is a pretty good bottom 6 center iceman, $3.5 million, 26 years old, only under contract for one more year. So low risk, low reward player. Came over from San Jose in the Carlson trade and has been pretty good for Ottawa. So I can see how he would help Seattle in starting up the franchise. Next, we have the Philadelphia Flyers, and they're going to have some interesting options here as well. We're going to take James Van Riemsdyk. Now, in the past, I've taken Shane Gostisbehere when we ran through this exercise before. But you know what? As an expansion team, you're going to need a proven goal scorer. Van Riemsdyk's still good in and around the net in the tight spaces. Not the quickest by any means, but certainly somebody who can be a good power play specialist and give you some goals. Contracts on that situation, it's only a couple more years left on it, so $7 million it's a lot to swallow, but with the cap that we're working with and how this team has been drafted so far, it could work for the Kraken. We have the Pittsburgh Penguins, and again, there's not a ton here. We could look at a defenseman like Mike Matheson, but not really overly fond of that contract, so we're going to take young forward here, Jarrett McCann. He'll be on to another team here. He's been bounced around a little bit, but 24 years old, he can play left wing, he can also play center. Under contract for one more year, 2.9. Certainly has a bit of an offensive upside to him. I think McCann could be a good pick here. Next, we have the San Jose Sharks. And again, like some of these teams, to be honest here, there's not a ton here that I really like. So we're going to take young center iceman Dylan Gambrell, 24 years old. He's a pending restricted free agent on a league minimum contract. It can be a good fourth-line center option. Maybe he plays in our minor league team. Maybe we trade him. I don't know. But I think as a Seattle franchise, selecting your players out of all the options there with the Sharks, Gambrell to me makes the most sense for what they have to work with. Next, we have the St. Louis Blues, and they also have some interesting picks here. You could look to your blue line, like a Marco Scandella, maybe even a guy like Vince Dunn. Hard to say if he's protected. And then you have some interesting forwards as well. Now, the way I've drafted so far, we've taken quite a few defensemen. So we're going to take a really solid forward who's under contract for a couple of years, and it's Oskar Sundqvist, 26 years old, making $2.75 million. Good contract. I think he could play a little bit bigger role in Seattle than he does in St. Louis and be absolutely terrific pickup. Next, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are also going to have some interesting picks here to select from. I mean, you're going to have a few veteran guys like Johnson, Coleman, Gaudreau, Maroon, all available. Even a guy like Chernak on the blue line. Maybe McElhinney on the goaltending spot if he were to get a new contract, because I do have to expose somebody there. But we're going to take young forward Matthew Joseph. He can skate like the wind, 24 years old, cheap contract, signed for another year. He could benefit from a change of scenery and a much bigger role here with the new franchise. Now we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, who again have some options here that you might find interesting. Goaltending, for example, like Jack Campbell. But you know what? I've been very impressed with Justin Hall. Has been a really solid top 4D, and he's likely going to be available after they protect guys like Riley, Brody, and Muzzin. So he's got a couple more years at $2 million, right shot. 29 years old, but still has a lot of hockey left in him. To me, Justin Hall makes a ton of sense here for the Maple Leafs to be giving up that in an expansion draft. Now, I understand the veterans they have to protect, but it really makes it a good choice here for Seattle. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks. And again, they have some guys here that are kind of exempt that are going to really not give you a ton to work with. I mean, they have some UFAs that may or may not be on the roster still. But for me, I'm going to have to take one of their contracts they're probably not crazy about, and it's Antoine Roussel. My new team here in Seattle. This team needs toughness, needs grit, needs character. Roussel defines that. And as much as I would rather take a different kind of player, we do need some of what he brings. So it makes sense that he get a shot with the Kraken. Now, the Washington Capitals being up next, they have some interesting choices as well. You could look to some forwards like Panik or Hagelin, Hathaway, Schultz, or Jensen on the back end. But we're going to take 25-year-old goaltender Vitek Vanacek, who's actually been surprisingly really good. And even though I have a couple of veteran guys between the pipes so far selected for the Kraken, he could be a potential goaltender of the future and work with those guys as mentors to be able to take over after a year or two's time. Jets are another team here coming up next that have some options that they're going to be able to protect a fair bit. They're going to be in decent shape here. So we're going to take a defenseman with our last pick. We're going to go with Nathan Beaulieu. Good contract, only on one more year left on the deal. $1.25 million, can play either side. We know he can be tough, add some grit, and that's certainly going to come in handy here. So to me, Beaulieu makes good sense for the Kraken to take for Winnipeg. So those are all the picks here. To quickly recap what we have, obviously from the forward group, we have some decent players. Only one bigger contract. We have James Van Riemsdyk, Brett Connolly, Tierney, Smith, Roussel, McCann, Heinen, Sundqvist, Pitlick, Turris, Howden, Joseph, Highmore, and Gambrell. So clearly a good mix there. We've got a good range of different ages, some younger 20s, mid-20s, early 30s. Nothing was really too crazy of a contract. Nobody's signed for more than 2 years, with most of them only being signed for one. Our total cap hit is $75.8 million, so we still have about say almost $6 million in cap space to work with, which is great. We've met all the requirements for the number of forwards, defense, and goalies we had to select here as well. So certainly a pretty good forward group to start with, I think. Then, of course, we have a pretty decent blue line and goaltending crew, I think, as well. Obviously, some of these players will end up being traded out for picks or whatnot as well. But on the blue line, we've got some pretty solid veteran guys like Giordano and Dumba. You got Colin Miller, Ryan Graves, who I think would be a big part of the future, Justin Hall, Mayfield, Borieski, Hayden Fleury looking for a bigger role, Victor Mete, Juice, Beaulieu, Garlson. I mean, to be honest, I think you're probably looking at your top six here being Giordano, Dumba, likely being your top pair. From there, you might have Ryan Graves on your second pair, possibly with a guy like Justin Hall, and then even some guys like maybe Mayfield and Fleury, for example, as your third pair, or maybe Fleury and Mete as well. And then you're gonna, like I said, you're gonna move out a few of these guys because you can't keep them all in the lineup as well. Some of the younger guys that are on different contracts here could end up in the minors as well. So obviously between the pipes, we got a couple of vets and Jonathan Quick and Anton Hudobin, and a couple of younger guys that go to the minors, or even a guy like Vanacek could be your number 3, and Evan Cormier as well. So certainly, I think a pretty good mix between all the different positions here. So those are my current picks based on today's roster, so keep that in mind. Of course, I do expect there to be player movement, more trades as teams prepare for the expansion draft, and obviously there'll be some big names especially that will likely find themselves on the move so that they're not claimed in the draft for nothing, obviously. There's going to be plenty of movement in preparation for that, and we'll likely be doing a couple more of these as the time goes on. So we'll likely do another one sometime after trade deadline when we know how the end of season rosters are going to look like. And we very well will do another one closer to the expansion draft once teams have had more opportunity to make more movement and we get a better idea how some of our selections very well could change based on their picks. So let me know who you'll be selecting down in the comments and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.